All right, let's talk about the male voice. If you're a vocal instructor, a choir director, or a voice coach, you already know that teaching male singers is incredibly rewarding. But it definitely comes with its own unique set of physiological puzzles, right? Well, today's explainer is a masterclass built specifically for you. We're going to dive straight into the latest vocal research and unpack the physiological blueprint for teaching male belting safely. We'll be looking specifically at your baritones and baritenors, breaking down the science, the acoustics, and some very practical studio applications so you can help them get that massive Broadway sound without wrecking their vocal cords.
So let's tackle the elephant in the room. When your male students, especially those baritones, hit that tricky transition area we call the passaggio, usually somewhere between C3 and F3, things can get pretty tense. The fear of vocal injury is totally real, both for them and for you. How exactly do we guide them through this break so they can access the power of a belt without them just, well, yelling? That's exactly what we're answering today.
But first, we need to completely redefine what contemporary belting actually is. Historically, a lot of folks thought belting was just dragging a heavy, thick chest voice as high up the scale as humanly possible. Honestly, that sounds painful just thinking about it. Science tells us that modern belting is definitely not damaging yelling. It's actually a highly sophisticated, anatomically grounded extension of the singer's natural modal voice. It's an acoustic strategy combining mixed voice, elevated resonance, and speech-like prosody. It's about brains, not just brute force.
To get us there, our roadmap for today's explainer goes like this. First, the baritone-specific challenge. Next, the physiology and vocal tract adjustments. Then we'll uncover the acoustic secret to belting, talk about vocal health during transition, and finally wrap up with a toolkit of practical exercises you can use in your studio today.
Okay, Section 1, the baritones challenge, navigating the passaggio. Let's look at the anatomical hurdle baritones face right at the start of that break. Because the male larynx features naturally wider, thicker structures, that C3 to F3 transition demands a very conscious, deliberate choice. If they don't adjust, the voice either totally flips into a weak falsetto or they just shout and strain.
And this is where we see the fork in the road. In traditional classical training, we use copertura, right? Covering the voice. You lower the larynx, raise the soft palate, and create this lovely, deep, round sound to delay the register break. But contemporary belting, it literally requires the exact opposite. Belting demands a super bright, speech-like vocal tract. If your student tries to use a classical, covered setup to sing a Broadway belt, they are going to hit an absolute straining wall of tension.
Which brings us nicely to Section 2, physiology and tract adjustments. Let's look at how we actually set up the instrument, because to execute this safely, your baritones have to essentially retune their entire vocal tract.
Physiologically speaking, a belt is a potent, energetic emission. But look at the muscular balance required here. Yes, it's driven predominantly by the thick, heavy resonance of the thyroarytenoid, the TA muscle. That's doing the lion's share of the work. But a healthy belt absolutely demands graded, active participation from the smaller cricothyroid, or CT muscle. That CT engagement elongates the folds and keeps them from tearing each other apart as the pitch rises. So remember, it's TA dominant for sure, but it is never TA exclusive.
Now, to get that bright Broadway sound safely, your singer has to intuitively orchestrate a few simultaneous adjustments. We're talking a slightly elevated larynx, a narrowed pharynx, and a karyoepiglottic narrowing, which, let's be real, we all just call twang. The goal is to shorten the vocal tract and create a literal megaphone shape with the mouth. Think about tuning an instrument. When you shorten the tube, you naturally boost the high, bright frequencies. It's like turning the vocal tract into a piccolo, so it can effortlessly slice through a massive orchestra.
Now for the really cool part, Section 3, the acoustic secret. This is all about amplification without the strain, and honestly, is fascinating because acoustics actually do the heavy lifting here, totally saving your singer's vocal folds.
The absolute secret sauce to a safe, sustainable belt is an acoustic phenomenon called formant tuning. Instead of relying on subglottic pressure, just pushing a ton of air from the lungs, the singer relies entirely on the filter. Formant tuning is when your singer brilliantly aligns the resonance frequencies of their vocal tract with the natural harmonics produced by the vocal folds.
Specifically, the magic happens through F1H2 tracking. By adjusting the shape of their mouth and throat, the singer aligns their first format right along with the second harmonic. When those two frequencies couple together, boom, it naturally and massively amplifies the sound. That right there is what creates that signature piercing ring of a belt. It completely eliminates the need to force the voice, because the acoustics are literally doing the amplification for you.
All right, moving into section 4, vocal health in transition. Let's take a second to bust a very persistent, very outdated myth in the vocal pedagogy world, the idea that belting just inherently ruins voices. Current physiological research totally refutes that. Studies on pros doing 8 shows a week prove that when belting is driven by these dynamic filter adjustments, like that format tuning we just talked about, it is completely sustainable. Plus, if they use a floating support technique, where the sternum stays buoyant and the ribs stay open laterally, the breath flows smoothly without squeezing the larynx. Simply put, belting is not yelling. It is highly coordinated acoustic engineering. But, as a vocal coach, you're the first line of defense. You've got to watch them like a hawk for compensatory errors. If your student is pushing excessive air, lifting their chin to somehow reach a high note, locking their jaw, or confusing a squeezed nasal sound with true frontal twang, they are going to wreck that delicate acoustic balance. Those bad habits are what lead to rapid vocal fatigue, not the belting itself.
So how do we translate all this heavy science into action? That brings us to section 5, practical exercises for students. Consider this your educator's toolkit.
Step 1 with any baritone is building muscular coordination without the temptation of volume. Have them do a stable, closed-mouth hum directly on the target pitch. The goal is to easily find that high note without blasting air, while keeping their posture completely relaxed. Listen, if they can't coordinate the muscles quietly, there is zero chance they can belt it safely at full volume. Step 2. Now we help them establish a firm, consistent chest connection to make sure that TA muscle is engaged correctly. A fantastic exercise for this is starting with vocal fry on a nice, gravelly ah vowel, and then smoothly transitioning that right into a bright, firm, laser-focused A. You want to listen incredibly closely to make sure that chest connection remains unbroken and consistent the whole way through.
Finally, step 3, locking in that high-resonance megaphone shape. Have them use a firm G consonant, like the word go, to safely build up just a little bit of subglottic pressure. Then, open that G into an ah or E vowel while doing descending glissandos. And tell them to exaggerate it, make it an ugly, annoying, witchy twang. The uglier and buzzier it feels to them in the studio, the more perfectly that F1-H2 coupling is actually locking into place. Which perfectly brings us to the core takeaway from our source material today. As researchers Cardozo and Fernandez emphasize, belting is an incredibly safe, deeply expressive, and thrilling technique, but only when it is guided by informed physiological pedagogy. As their teacher, your understanding of these acoustic principles is literally the key to their vocal longevity. So, now that you've got this entire physiological masterclass under your belt, I want to leave you with a quick challenge. Think about your current roster of students. Which of these acoustic adjustments, whether it's the witchy twang, the floating support, or finding that sweet F1-H2 tuning, are you going to try out first to unlock your next baritone's full potential? Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and happy teaching.